Gary Neville has spent his entire post-playing career analysing other people's failures. Every Monday night on Sky Sports, he dissects managers who cracked under pressure, players who couldn't handle the mental side of the game. He's built a second career on his authority as someone who knows what pressure looks like, what leadership requires. Because he was Manchester United's captain, because he won everything. Until May 2024, when he sat across from Conor McGregor and made the fatal mistake of suggesting that fighters don't understand real pressure because it's just you and one other person, not a whole team depending on you. What Conor said in response made Gary Neville sit in complete silence for 32 seconds. This is that story. Gary Neville, 49 years old, is Sky Sports royalty. 19 years at Manchester United, 8 Premier League titles, Champions League winner, Ferguson's trusted captain. Since retiring in 2011, he'd become the most respected pundit in English football. His authority came from his CV. He'd done it at the highest level. But Neville's one failure was catastrophic. December 2015, he became Valencia manager. March 2016, he was sacked. 3 wins from 16 games, a managerial disaster he'd never fully addressed. The Monday Night Football invitations seemed straightforward. The topic, pressure in elite sports. Neville would represent team sports, Conor individual sports. But Conor had watched Neville's punditry for years, had studied his Valencia failure, and had very specific things he wanted to say about leadership and accountability. Neville had recently said that individual sport athletes have it easier mentally because they only have to worry about themselves, not letting down teammates. Nobody had challenged him directly, until now. The Sky Sports studio was Neville's territory. Jamie Carragher sat off to the side, ready to chime in. Host Kelly Cates sat between them. Neville wore his usual outfit, dark suit, no tie, comfortable authority. Conor wore a 3-piece charcoal suit, looking every inch the businessman. Kelly opened with questions about handling pressure. Neville spoke eloquently about playing under Ferguson, about the pressure of wearing the United shirt. His tone was confident, the tone of someone who'd succeeded at the highest level. Conor listened politely, asking thoughtful questions about United's treble season, about Ferguson's management. The first 12 minutes were pleasant. Then Kelly asked the trigger question. Gary, you've said team sports create different pressure because you're responsible to others. With Conor here, someone who fights alone, I'm curious about that distinction. Neville nodded, clearly ready. Look, I have massive respect for what Conor does, but the pressure is fundamentally different. When I played for United, I wasn't just worried about my performance. I was worried about letting down teammates, my manager, 75,000 fans at Old Trafford, millions watching. If I made a mistake, it affected the entire team. That's a different level of responsibility. He looked at Conor with a slight smile. In your fights, it's you and your opponent. You win or lose based on your performance alone. That's pressurized, but it's isolated. You're not carrying anyone else. The studio went quiet. Conor took a slow breath. Gary, have you ever been in a situation where if you fail, you lose everything? Not the match, not the season, everything.
Neville looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, Conor said, leaning forward, when you played for United, if you had a bad game, what happened? You had 9 other players covering for you, a manager making adjustments, another match next week to redeem yourself. If United lost, it was the team's fault, not just yours. And even if you had a terrible season, you still got paid. You still had a contract. Your livelihood wasn't on the line every single time you stepped on that pitch. Neville shifted. Well, no, but that's how team sports work. Exactly, Conor agreed. But let me tell you how individual sports work. When I fight, I fight alone. No teammates to cover mistakes, no manager to adjust, just me and another man trained to destroy me. If I lose, I don't just lose the fight, I lose my ranking, my marketability, my bargaining power. One bad night can end my career, one knockout can make me irrelevant. There's no one to share the blame with, it's all on me. His intensity was building. And here's the crucial difference, Gary. You played for United, massive infrastructure, world-class facilities, sports psychologists, nutritionists, everything you needed. I came from nothing. I built my own team, paid my own coaches, funded my own camps, and when I step in that octagon, all those people can't help me. They're outside. I'm inside, alone, fighting for everything I've built. So don't tell me team pressure is harder because you had teammates depending on you. I have dozens depending on me, coaches, training partners, managers, family. And when I fight, I face the opponent completely alone with all their livelihoods on my shoulders. That's pressure, Gary. Isolated, total, unshared pressure. The studio was frozen. Neville's confident expression had shifted to something defensive. Conor wasn't finished. But let's talk about leadership, Gary. You were United's captain for how long? About 5 years, Neville said cautiously. 5 years, leading one of the best teams in the world, with Rio Ferdinand, Paul Scholes, Ryan Giggs, Cristiano Ronaldo, world-class players everywhere, and you're saying that's harder leadership than what I do? It's different, Neville insisted. Leadership within a collective. Right, Conor nodded. Where's the leadership when you're alone? Neville frowned. I'm not sure what you mean. Then Conor dropped it. Let me ask you about Valencia. Visible flinch. Neville's body language changed. That was December 2015. You became Valencia manager. March 2016, you were sacked. 3 wins from 16 games. The team in crisis. The fans wanted you out, and you left. That was leadership under pressure, Gary. Real pressure. No teammates to share blame. You were the manager. You were responsible. And when it got hard, when results didn't come, what happened? You failed and you left. The silence was devastating. Jamie Carragher looked uncomfortable. Kelly Cates was frozen. Neville's face had gone pale. That was a difficult situation, Neville said weakly. Language barriers, cultural differences. The squad wasn't good enough, Conor interrupted. That's the excuse? I've fought opponents better than me on paper. Bigger, stronger, more experienced, and I found a way to win because that's what champions do. They don't blame circumstances, they overcome them. But you didn't at Valencia. You failed. Then you came back to punditry, where it's safe, where you can analyze other people's failures without risking your own. The attack was surgical. Everything Neville had built his career on, his authority from experience, his right to criticize, was being dismantled. Neville tried to regroup. Management and playing are completely different. About leadership, Conor interrupted. About making decisions under pressure. About being accountable when things go wrong. About inspiring people when everything's falling apart. And you couldn't do it, Gary. You had Valencia for 4 months and couldn't make it work. That's not an attack, but it is a fact, and it raises a question. If you couldn't handle managing Valencia for 4 months, why are you qualified to tell me my pressure is easier because I fight alone? Neville's jaw clenched. Valencia was one failure, one experience, one opportunity where you had to lead alone, and you couldn't. I've had dozens of fights, dozens of opportunities leading alone, and I've won championships in multiple weight classes. I've faced adversity, losses, injuries, controversies, and I've come back every time because I don't have the luxury of blaming teammates. There is no one else, it's just me. So when you say team pressure is harder because you're responsible to others, I say you don't know what real responsibility is. Real responsibility is knowing that if you fail, there's no one else to point to. You either perform or you lose everything. And you've never experienced that, Gary. You've experienced team pressure, which is real and difficult, but you've never experienced total, isolated, you alone versus the world pressure. And the one time you got close at Valencia, you cracked. The assessment was brutal and accurate. Neville looked punched. "But I came back from Valencia," he said weakly. "You came back to punditry," Conor corrected, "to a safe job analysing football. You didn't go back into management. You didn't prove you could do it. You retreated where you can't fail because you're not competing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Punditry is valuable. You're good at it. But don't lecture me about pressure when you quit management after one failure and never went back. I've lost fights. I've been knocked out. I've been humiliated in front of millions, and I got back in that cage every time because I don't have the luxury of blaming teammates. There is no one else. It's just me. So when you say team pressure is harder because you're responsible to others, I say you don't know what real responsibility is. Real responsibility is knowing that if you fail, there's no one else to point to. You either perform or you lose everything. And you've never experienced that, Gary. You've experienced team pressure, which is real and difficult, but you've never experienced total, isolated, you alone versus the world pressure. And the one time you got close at Valencia, you cracked. The assessment was brutal and accurate. Neville looked punched. "But I came back from Valencia," he said weakly. "You came back to punditry," Conor corrected, "to a safe job analysing football. You didn't go back into management. You didn't prove you could do it. You retreated where you can't fail because you're not competing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Punditry is valuable. You're good at it. But don't lecture me about pressure when you quit management after one failure and never went back. I've lost fights. I've been knocked out. I've been humiliated in front of millions, and I got back in that cage every time because I don't have the luxury of blaming teammates. There is no one else. It's just me. So when you say team pressure is harder because you're responsible to others, I say you don't know what real responsibility is. Real responsibility is knowing that if you fail, there's no one else to point to. You either perform or you lose everything. And you've never experienced that, Gary. You've experienced team pressure, which is real and difficult, but you've never experienced total, isolated, you alone versus the world pressure. And the one time you got close at Valencia, you cracked.
Jamie Carragher suddenly spoke. "Can I say something?" Kelly nodded, relieved. "Gary," Carragher said, his Liverpool accent thick, "I think Conor's got a point here, mate." Neville looked at his co-pundit with betrayal. "Cara? Hear me out," Carragher continued. "We've talked about how being a pundit is easier than being a manager because we don't make decisions, we just analyse them. And you did struggle at Valencia, we both know that. But Conor's right that it's different when you're alone. When I was playing, if I had a bad game, I had 10 other lads on the pitch. We'd win or lose together. But what Conor does, what boxers do, that's different. That's you alone, no hiding, no sharing. You either perform or you don't." Neville looked hurt. "You're taking his side." "I'm saying he's making a fair point," Carragher said firmly. "You've been saying team sports have more pressure because of collective responsibility, but maybe individual sports have more pressure because there is no collective to share it with. Maybe it's not better or worse, just different. And maybe we shouldn't judge something we've never experienced." The intervention was significant. Carragher was Neville's professional partner, his friend, and he was publicly acknowledging Conor had a point. Conor nodded at Carragher. "I appreciate that, Jamie. I'm not saying football pressure isn't real. It absolutely is, but it's different. You lads had each other. You had a system, a structure, a team. In the cage, I have none of that. It's just me and my training and my will to win. And if that's not enough, I lose, completely, publicly, permanently." Neville tried once more. "But surely managing a team requires different mental skills, man management, tactical awareness, dealing with personalities. That's more complex than individual preparation." "Is it?" Conor challenged. "I have to manage my entire team, coaches, nutritionists, training partners, managers, sponsors. I have to make tactical decisions during fights when I'm exhausted and hurt. I have to deal with my opponent's strategy, adapting in real time. And I do all of that while being punched in the face, Gani, while my body's in pain, while my adrenaline's spiking, while 50 million people watch. You made tactical decisions from the touchline. I make them while someone's trying to choke me unconscious. Which one requires more mental strength?" Neville had no answer. "And here's another thing," Conor continued. "You talk about man management like it's complex, but people are people. Whether you're managing them in a dressing room or in a training camp, it's the same principles. Respect them, communicate clearly, hold them accountable, lead by example. The setting doesn't matter, the principles do. And I've built and managed teams while also being the one who has to perform. You managed Valencia but didn't play. You were outside looking in. I manage my team and I'm the one in the cage, so I have to be good at man management and good at performing. You only had to do one. Neville's expression was unreadable, but the biggest difference, Conor said quietly, is accountability. At Valencia, when things went wrong, you could blame the board, the players, the language barrier, and you did. I've read your interviews. You blamed everything except yourself. But when I lose a fight, there's no one to blame but me. I can't blame my coaches. I hired them. I can't blame my opponent. I chose to fight him. I can't blame the referee, the judges, the circumstances. It's all on me. And that's what real leadership looks like, Gary. Total accountability. No excuses, no hiding. You either succeed or you fail. And either way, it's your responsibility. That's the pressure of fighting alone.
Long, heavy silence. Neville looked down at the desk, hands clasped. When he looked up, his expression had changed. "You're right about Valencia," he said quietly. Everyone stilled. "I failed there. I wasn't ready for it. I didn't handle the pressure well, and I did make excuses afterward. I blamed the squad, the board, the situation, because it was easier than admitting I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't do it." Conor didn't gloat. He just listened. "I came back to punditry," Neville continued, "because it's what I'm good at, and because management showed me I don't have the mental strength to lead a team when things are falling apart. You're right that I've never experienced the kind of isolated pressure you experience every fight, and maybe that means I shouldn't have been so quick to judge it as easier." The admission was stunning. Gary Neville was admitting on live television that he'd failed and retreated to safety. But Conor's response surprised everyone. "Gary," he said gently, "everyone fails. The question is what you learn from it. You learned management isn't for you. That's valuable. But you can't let that failure make you defensive about other people's pressure. Just because you couldn't handle Valencia doesn't mean team pressure is inherently harder. It just means you struggled with that specific type at that specific time." Neville nodded slowly. "I think I've been defensive about it, using my playing career to maintain authority while avoiding talking about the one time I really led alone. And you're right, that's unfair. That's hiding." "Thank you for that," Conor said simply, "because that's honest, and honesty is all I'm asking for. Don't tell me my pressure is easier when you've never experienced it. Don't judge individual sports from outside. Respect what you don't understand." Neville met his eyes. "Fair enough. I respect that, and I respect what you do, more now than before." The interview ended, but the impact was massive. Within 90 minutes, Neville McGregor was trending. Clips of Neville's admission about Valencia were shared millions of times. British football media exploded. The Guardian, McGregor forces Neville to confront Valencia failure. The Telegraph, when the pundit became the analysed. The Athletic, the problem with pundit authority, what Conor McGregor exposed. Sky Sports received thousands of messages praising both men, but acknowledging Conor had won by forcing Neville to face uncomfortable truths. The football community mostly sided with Conor. A Premier League captain tweeted, "Gary's a legend, but he's wrong. Playing with teammates is support. Fighting alone is terrifying. Different pressures, both valid, but don't compare unless you've done both." Jamie Carragher posted, "Tough watch, but needed conversation. We pundits talk about pressure without experiencing it ourselves. Humility required." 2 days later, Neville published a column, "What Conor McGregor Taught Me About Pressure." In it, he wrote, "I've spent years analysing others' failures while avoiding examining my own. Valencia was a disaster. I wasn't ready for the isolation, the accountability, the pressure of being the single point of failure. I retreated to punditry because it's safe." Conor was right to call that out. He fights knowing failure is public, permanent, and entirely his responsibility. I've never experienced that. Individual pressure is different, not harder or easier, different, and I shouldn't have judged it. What happened on Monday Night Football wasn't just about pressure, it was about leadership, accountability, and the difference between collective and isolated responsibility. Neville assumed his experience was universal, that team pressure was the highest form, but he judged individual sports without experiencing them. Conor showed Neville his blind spot. You failed at Valencia and never went back. You blamed everyone but yourself. You retreated to safety. That doesn't make Neville bad, but it disqualifies him from claiming team pressure is inherently harder. The lesson: different types of pressure exist, they require different skills, and you can't judge one as superior unless you've experienced both. This interview exposed something about sports media. Pundits have built careers analyzing pressure while operating in a consequence-free environment. They criticize managers for failing under pressure while never putting themselves in comparable situations. Conor forced Neville to confront that contradiction, and Neville admitted it. That admission showed more courage than anything he did as a player, because admitting failure is harder than defending it. True leadership isn't about having people behind you to share the weight, it's about carrying the weight yourself and moving forward anyway. Gary Neville was brilliant at leading within a team, but he wasn't equipped to lead alone. Conor McGregor has spent his career leading alone, and that's why he understood something Neville didn't.